What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back, and as always, thank you for joining me. My name is Paul Brettel. I'm the site editor over at Dairyland Express, where we cover the Packers, Brewers, Bucks, and Badgers. I also have a new article every Monday over at Cheesehead TV. As it says at the bottom of the screen here, you can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. So it's been a while. I do apologize, but June was a very, very hectic month for me, and any sort of free time that I did have was devoted to writing over these videos. But we are back today. And so what I'm going to discuss is my early Green Bay Packers 53-man roster prediction. So I have this in article form over at Dairyland Express. This was following OTAs, following minicamp, just going through, again, some early predictions. And we learned, again, it's OTAs minicamp, take it with a grain of salt, but I believe we learned a few little bit of nuggets of information. And that went into helping me come up with my prediction at this point as well. So let's dive in. Here's my very early Green Bay Packers roster prediction. So let's start with quarterbacks. Rostering two of them. This position is about as easy as it gets. Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love, they're going to be the two quarterbacks on this roster. Maybe before the Packers release Kurt Benkert, there maybe could have been some discussion about them keeping a third on the roster, but as I've discussed probably on here, and I know in my writing, the third roster spot for a quarterback, that's a spot that can just be better utilized elsewhere. That's someone who is not going to see the field, barring any unforeseen circumstances. So Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, those are your two quarterbacks. Next up, running back. I have three: Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, and Patrick Taylor. Now with all of the players who are recovering from ACL injuries, Kyle and Hill included. At this stage of the game, we don't really know when they're going to be available. I know there's a lot of optimism around Robert Tonyan maybe being ready for week one, but at this time for this exercise, all of those players are beginning on the PUP list for me. So that's why Kyle and Hill is not included. If he was available, he would be my third running back and front runner for that role. But he's on the PUP list in this situation. So we know Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon will be on the roster. Battling for that third spot is Patrick Taylor and undrafted rookies B.J. Baylor and Tyler Goodson. Baylor was a very productive runner this past year at Oregon State, was very good at forcing missed tackles. Wasn't used a ton in the passing game, however. Tyler Goodson from Iowa kind of gives off some Aaron Jones vibes. Used in the run game, used in the passing game, athletically, testing-wise. Him and Jones are similar in that regard as well. And I know he's a favorite of many Green Bay Packers fans to potentially push for a roster spot, which he absolutely could. But I'm going with Patrick Taylor. This is his third season now in this Green Bay Packers offense. We saw him last season on a few occasions, especially in Week 18 against the Detroit Lions. I've talked about it here. He's just such a good fit for this LaFleur offense as a ball carrier, a pass catcher, a willing and fairly sound blocker at the running back position. We all know how important having that well-rounded skill set is. And then again, just the experience that he has entering his third season in this LaFleur offense, which comes with his nuances when it comes to learning it. So that alone gives him an advantage over those undrafted rookies. But again, from a football skill set standpoint, I think he's just an awesome fit for LaFleur in this Packers offense. So he's my third running back. Next up, wide receiver. So I'm keeping six, and it's the six obvious ones in my opinion: Christian Watson, Sammy Watkins, Romeo Doubs, Randall Cobb, Allen Lazard, and Amari Rodgers. Reason I have six: one, the Packers have never kept more than six receivers on the roster under Matt LaFleur. And while there is the uncertainty at the receiver position, having a seventh receiver, I don't know, helps with that by any means. And reason I say that is because this isn't the old McCarthy offense where we're going to see five wide. It's going to be a lot of three wide receiver sets. And we know the running backs and tight ends are very, very active in the passing game. So when it comes to pass catchers, it's not just the receivers, it's the running backs and tight ends as well. Robert Tonyan will be returning. And in each of the last three seasons, Aaron Jones has finished second on the team in targets. A.J. Dillon was also active in the passing game last year as well. So while there's the unknowns at the receiver position, it's not as if the Packers are lacking options in terms of who Rodgers can throw the ball to. If there are going to be receivers who push for that seventh spot, and again, the guys that I listed, I think are locks. I don't think any of them are going to be left off. Even Amari Rodgers, I think this is a very, very important summer and year for him, but I think he's going to get another chance at it. But if there's two receivers that could push Matt LaFleur into keeping 7, it's going to be Samori Toure, rookie 7th rounder, or Juwan Winfrey. And their path to doing so is going to be on special teams contributions. Again, if one of them makes the roster as the 7th receiver, I don't see a lot of playing time on offense. Rodgers is going to rely heavily, at least early on the veterans. Sammy Watkins, Alan Lazard, and Randall Cobb. They're going to take a bulk of the receiver targets early on. Again, you mix in Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, Robert Tonyan, Josiah DeGuara, Mercedes Lewis. I just don't see, from an offensive standpoint, there being a ton of playing time for a 7th receiver. But again, Samori Toure, Juwan Winfrey, those are the two what I would call front runners that could push for the 7th spot, but they're going to have to earn their way through special teams. Tight end position. This one, if Robert Tonyan begins on the PUP list, which, as I mentioned, I have him in this scenario, things are pretty straightforward. Mercedes Lewis, Josiah DeGuara, Dominic Daphne, and Tyler Davis. Tyler Davis has been talked about, raved about by Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, and Rich Bisaccia all this offseason. So if he can live up to that hype, he is absolutely going to be on this Packers roster. But where the decision or difficult decision lies with this position group is when Robert Tonyan's healthy. Who are the Packers going to cut? Or do they keep 5 tight ends and have to make a difficult roster decision and make a cut elsewhere from a different position because they're keeping a 5th tight end? So we know Tonyan, Lewis, and DeGuara are going to be a part of this Packers team. A lot of hype around Davis, as I just mentioned, but of course he's going to have to show it this summer during training camp in the preseason. And then there's Dominic Daphne, who's been a very willing blocker, gives Green Bay kind of a second option behind DeGuara in that H-back role. The reason why I think there's value in keeping 5 tight ends is Davis and Daphne, I think both could be very, very good special teams players under Rich Bisaccia. Bisaccia has already talked about Davis's special teams ability from last season. As a member of the Green Bay Packers, I believe he was top 10 on the team in special team snaps, or very close to it. So he does have some experience in that regard. And again, on tape, he's already stood out to Bisaccia. Daphne, as I mentioned, a very good blocker, finished top 10 last season by PFF's run blocking grade among all tight ends. And again, that ability, that blocking ability, and just kind of his versatility that he brings, that's something that could be utilized on special teams as well. So for the purpose of this was an easy decision because, again, Robert Tonyan's on the PUP list. We're keeping those 4. But when Tonyan's healthy, that's where the decision lies. Are the Packers going to cut Davis? Are they going to cut Daphne? Or are they going to keep 5 tight ends? Which, as I just mentioned, I think very much is in play because of special teams. Now, onto the offensive line. So I'm keeping 9, which is what the Green Bay Packers have kept each season under Matt LaFleur. So there are 7 locks, in my opinion. David Bakhtiari. And yes, I'm going to, at this point, remain optimistic that he is going to be fully available for training camp, ready to go for week 1, all that good stuff. So David Bakhtiari, John Runyon, Josh Myers, Royce Newman, Yosh Nijman, Zach Tom, and Sean Ryan. So that's 7 players right there. Elton Jenkins, if he were to be ready to go for week 1, there's your 8th. But again, for the purpose of this exercise, he's beginning on the PUP list. So that leaves me 2 roster spots up for grabs. One of them I'm giving to Jake Hansen. Even I forgot that Jake Hansen was on the 53-man roster last year. He very much flew under the radar last summer. Or at least my memories of his performance, because we follow along closely with what's going on at training camp practices. He was rarely even mentioned in that regard as someone standing out. And then I still have memories of that Buffalo preseason game where he had the bad snap, the delay game, but then he ends up on the 53-man roster. Saw just 13 offensive snaps, or a very, very small amount. But the reason that I think he makes it again, this is his 3rd season, so there's that experience, which I do think is important. On top of that, he gives Green Bay a backup option at center. So Josh Myers is going to be the starting center. When Elton Jenkins returns, we know he can play center, but in terms of value, he's much, much more valuable as a right tackle than as a center. Zach Tom, the rookie 4th-round pick, he has the ability to play center as well. But going back to that experience, this is a new offense for Tom. He's adjusting to life at the NFL level. That's certainly possible that Jake Hansen at this point in his career, but at this stage of their careers, being a 3rd-year player in the same offense versus a 1st-year player transitioning to the NFL, that experience maybe what puts him over the top, and maybe he ends up being Green Bay's second option at center. On top of that, we've seen him this early on this summer in the offseason programs, taking snaps at right guard. So getting that positional versatility, which we know is important to the Packers offense, Matt LaFleur, Adam Stenavich. My other offensive lineman that I'm keeping for the time being is Cole Van Lanen. Big thing with him is versatility. I can play right tackle, could move to the interior, and trying to read the tea leaves a little bit from OTAs and minicamp. He was taking snaps at right tackle with the first team. So that experience is shining through a little bit. And again, that's off-season programs. But I know I keep going back to experience, so I just want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Reason I think that's important, particularly with the Packers, is they absolutely value it. Even high-end draft picks rarely, under Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, come in and are preferred starters right away. Darnell Savage and Josh Myers are the only players that come to mind for me who, from the time they were drafted, came into the summer programs were pretty much, you knew they were going to be one of the starters on the offensive or defensive side of the ball. But that's not the norm. I mean, even look at Jair Alexander and Josh Jackson. By week 1 of 2018, their rookie season, in terms of snap counts, they were behind Kevin King and Tramon Williams. 2019 class, Rashawn Gary was obviously behind the Smiths. Elton Jenkins didn't take over as one of the starters until Lane Taylor got injured. The 2020, of course, was Jordan Love behind Aaron Rodgers. A.J. Dillon was behind Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. Josiah DeGuara joined a tight end room with Mercedes Lewis and Robert Tonyan. Eric Stokes last season, he was not a starter week 1. It was Kevin King and Jair Alexander. So you can see there's numerous examples of even high-end draft picks not necessarily being considered starters right away. Now, of course, that doesn't mean they can't become starters. Many of those players did throughout the season, but right away, Green Bay tends to lean towards experience. Cole Van Lanen is entering his second season, and early on in OTAs and minicamp, we're seeing Green Bay at least rely on that at this portion of the offseason. So I'm going to go with him as the 9th offensive lineman. Again, experience, but he brings that positional versatility that we know the Packers covet, being able to play both tackle and guard. All right, let's transition to the defensive side of the ball. Along the interior defensive line, I'm keeping 5. Kenny Clark, Jaron Reed, Dean Lowry, TJ Slayton, and Devontae Wyatt. Those are locks. We know that that's going to be the 5-man rotation. The question mark with this position is, do they keep 5 interior defensive linemen or 6? They've kept 6 2 of LaFleur's 3 years, 5 in one of the others. Reason that I just went with 5 is because they kept Jack Heflin as the 6th interior defensive lineman last season. He played under 20 snaps on the defensive side of the ball, played under 20 snaps on special teams. So we know that the 5 players who are on the roster, that's going to be the rotation. If they keep a 6th player, whether it's Heflin or Jonathan Ford, those are my guesses who the front runners for those roles would be. They're not going to see really any snaps on defense, assuming everyone's healthy. Their path to doing so, making the team, is going to be through standing out on special teams. But I decided to go with just 5 interior defensive linemen. Edge rusher, I went with 5 again. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Randy Ramsey, Jonathan Garvin, and Kingsley Enagbare. So we know those first 2 spots are absolutely locked up. The other 3 are 100% up for grabs. Not that there aren't favorites for those roles, but there's nobody in that 3rd, 4th, 5th edge rusher spot on the Green Bay Packers depth chart that I think you can Sharpie in right now. It's completely up for grabs. So I went with Jonathan Garvin because of experience again, which obviously is a lot of what we're relying on this point, just because we haven't seen them in full pads yet. We haven't seen the training camp practices, heard about the practices, seen them in preseason action. So we have to kind of rely on just what we know at this point. And this is a big season for Jonathan Garvin, 3rd season in the NFL, and hopefully he can take that step forward. He saw significant snaps last season as one of Green Bay's 3rd, 4th edge rushers in that rotation, but this is a unit depth-wise that needs to improve. There was a lack of impact plays when Gary and Smith weren't on the field last season, and that occurs fairly regularly at edge rusher. It's a heavily rotated position. Smith and Gary were on the field for about 68% of the Packers' defensive snaps a season ago, and that's normal, but that's 1/3 of your snaps without either of them on the field or not on the field together. And that's a lot. So a lot of time without two of your star players. So whether it's against the run or against the pass, the Packers need more from this edge rusher unit. Hopefully, Jonathan Garvin can give them that in his third season. Kingsley Enagbare, Packers fifth round pick. I think he can fill a very specific role in obvious passing situations, third downs, second and longs, those type of scenarios. Where they can line him up outside, they can line him up over the middle, they can move him around and just say, hey, pin your ears back and go get the quarterback. Randy Ramsey, I think he's someone that's forgotten about a little bit this summer just because he missed all of last season. He suffered an ankle injury. It was either in July or early August of last year, which landed him on season-ending IR. But in 2020, he was fourth on the Packers in special team snaps. So under Rich Bisaccia, he's potentially someone who could flourish in that role. He saw just 75 defensive snaps in 2020. So again, if he's going to be on the roster, special teams is important, but with the openings at edge rusher, they're looking for players who can step in and be rotational, key rotational players as well. And little nugget with Randy Ramsey following the draft, Brian Gutekunst was asked about just the edge rusher position in general, and he specifically named Ramsey as someone that he is excited about, and the Packers are excited about having back. So again, reading the tea leaves, trying to just pick little nuggets here and there when we can. So those are my 5 edge rushers. Linebacker position. Now, disclaimer here, I have since altered who I'm going to have at the linebacker position because, again, of some new information that was learned. So Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker, Chris Barnes, Isaiah McDuffie, and Ty Summers were my 5 linebackers. However, I was recently reading an article from Bill Huber of Sports Illustrated where he had mentioned that throughout OTAs and minicamp, of course, Campbell and Walker were the first linebacker duo on the field. The second was Chris Barnes and Ray Wilborn. Ray Wilborn was ahead of both McDuffie and Ty Summers. So knowing that, which at the time when I put this together, I was unaware of that, I would replace Wilborn for Summers. Again, if we're trying to read some of those tea leaves. The first 3 are locks. Campbell and Walker are going to be the guys. Chris Barnes, he brings, has a experience. He can fill a very specific niche role against the run, and he's someone else I think could become a core special teams player under Rich Bisaccia. Isaiah McDuffie was top 10 in special team snaps last year. Not really sure where he's at defensively, but the reason I chose Wilborn over Summers was, one, because of that information we just learned. But coming out of Ball State, Wilborn spent time at both safety and linebacker. And not that he's anywhere near the level that Campbell and Walker are, but skill set wise, he fits that mold of someone who you can have on the field, whether it's a running down or whether it's a passing situation, which is what Green Bay is going for. So they can stay in their base nickel defense more often, makes things more challenging for the opposing offense to decipher what's taking place when you're not running different personnel in and out. Last season, the Green Bay Packers had a bit of a tell depending on who was on the field. If it was Devondre Campbell and Chris Barnes, Packers were more likely than not probably trying to play the run a little bit. If it was Devondre Campbell and safety Henry Black on the field, they were probably looking to play the pass. But now when you have Campbell and Walker out there consistently all the time, it's going to be a lot more difficult to figure out what Green Bay is trying to do. And skill set wise, again, Wilborn is not on their level, but skill set wise, he fits that similar mold. And again, special teams contributions are going to be uber important for him. So next up, let's move on to the cornerback position. So I have the Packers keeping 6, which is how many they've kept previously under Matt LaFleur. So the first 3 players are locks: Jair Alexander, Rasul Douglas, Eric Stokes. I would also consider Keyshawn Nixon pretty close to a lock as well. He has easily been the front runner for the 4th cornerback slot on this Packers team during offseason programs. He gives them some added depth in the slot where they just don't really have that right now. He also played special teams, was a standout special teams player with the Las Vegas Raiders under Rich Bisaccia, so that'll be important as well. Shamar John-Charles, he's my 5th cornerback. I wouldn't call him a lock. I wouldn't call him as close to a lock as Keyshawn Nixon. His roster spot still is up for grabs in my mind, but I certainly think he's one of the favorites to make the team for similar reasons as Nixon, although I don't think he may be at that same level, but he gives Green Bay an added slot presence, which they need, and he too was top 10 in special team snaps last year. The 6th spot is where it gets interesting, and I decided to go with Rico Gafford. So Rico was signed by Green Bay earlier this offseason, and he spent his entire NFL career, which began in 2018, as a wide receiver. So he's just converted over to cornerback, which is where he played in college at the University of Wyoming. He was a cornerback there. So with the position change at this NFL level, after being a receiver for 4 or 5 seasons in the NFL, there's obviously going to be a learning curve that comes with this move, even though he's played it in the past. But the reason that I wanted to keep him on this roster was because of special teams. Coming out of Wyoming, Gafford ran a 4.22 40-yard dash. That is elite of the elite, a 4.22 time in the 40-yard dash. And that type of speed in the gunner role can be incredibly valuable. He was taking first team reps on with the special teams unit as the gunner. Andy Herman of Packer Report would note that he had several knife reps, including beating his guy downfield to recover a muff punt attempt. So that speed, I mean, you can't coach speed, as they say. And so having that type of dynamic element ability on this special teams unit, I think would be very, very valuable. And again, he was in Las Vegas previously, is familiar with Rich Bisaccia. Bisaccia is familiar with him. I guess the big question mark with him being on special teams is tackling. Coming from, he's been an offensive player. Tackling isn't as much or really much of a requirement in that role where it is defensively as a cornerback or on special teams. So that'll be something to watch this summer. But with that speed, taking snaps with the first team special teams unit, I had to include him on this roster prediction. Safety, I kept 5. Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage. Again, we know those two are going to be on the roster. I then went with Tariq Carpenter, Vernon Scott, and Sean Davis. So Tariq Carpenter gives him that versatility. He can play down in the box as a linebacker. He may actually transition to being a linebacker just given his size at about 230 pounds, but he can play deep as well as if needed. And he has over 400 special team snaps from his time at Georgia Tech. He could become a key special teams player under Bisaccia. Sean Davis, based on what we've seen so far, he's the front runner for that third safety spot, which is absolutely up for grabs. When Adrian Amos wasn't at some of the Packers OTA practices, it was Sean Davis lining up next to not Vernon Scott. It was Sean Davis lining up next to Darnell Savage as that second safety. So again, if we're trying to glean what we can from some of those practices, that shows us that at least at this point in time, he's the third safety on the depth chart. And in a press conference, Ryan Downard, the Packers safety coach, he would comment on how intelligent Davis is, just how quickly he picks up the defensive system, his responsibilities, what the offense is doing. And he also would mention that he's incredibly explosive as well. So my 5th cornerback was Vernon Scott. It's going to be Vernon Scott, Innis Gaines. Trey Sterling is an undrafted rookie from Oklahoma State that the Packers signed. Those players will be battling it out for that 5th spot. And that's if the Packers keep 5. This is one of those positions where they may choose just to keep 4. But I went with Vernon Scott because of experience. And Green Bay kept him on the roster last season, even though he rarely saw any snaps. So to some degree, there's something there that they like that he can offer. So again, a lot of this, we haven't seen them in pads yet this summer. Training camp preseason is going to be the litmus test. But at this point, we're just trying to glean what we can based off a skill set, past experience, things of that nature. So Vernon Scott makes the cut here. Lastly, the specialists, Pat O'Donnell, Mason Crosby, and Stephen Wordle. Pat O'Donnell's the only punter on the roster, so that was easy. I don't think there's an actual kicker competition going on. I think that they have the second kicker in, which is a very common practice. This isn't abnormal. Just to take some of the kicking reps this summer so Mason Crosby doesn't have to do them all. The reason that I don't think that there's an actual competition here is this is a team obviously with Super Bowl aspirations and relying heavily on a rookie kicker in this instance to hit a 42-yarder at Lambeau Field in January. There's a lot of risk involved in that. Whereas with Mason Crosby, you know what you're getting for the most part. And I know last year was a down year, but it certainly wasn't all his fault. The blocking unit on the field goal team was poor. There were bad snaps, there were bad holds. Yes, at the end of the day, he's the one making the kicks. Yes, there were kicks that he missed that were squarely on his shoulders, but there were plenty of attempts too that a lot went wrong in the process. And the Packers coaching staff knows that. So for those reasons, I think he's going to be on the roster. And having a second kicker right now is just kind of a formality. It's the norm for pretty much every NFL team during these summers. And then Steven Wirtle, I mean, him versus Jack Coco. I'm going to go with Wordle because of the experience. Coco also transitioned to tight end his final year at Georgia Tech, so he hasn't actually uh, taken special team or long snaps since 2020. And when he was the long snapper at Georgia Tech, he did it only on field goal attempts. So punt, not that he didn't practice it, but in game, he doesn't have any long snap attempts on punts. So that's something else. That's just an added element for him that he's going to have to adjust to in addition to transitioning from college to the NFL. So for those reasons, I'm just going to stick with the guy who's been on the roster, but that long snapper spot is absolutely 100% up for grabs. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Packers long snapper this season isn't on the roster yet. They could certainly still look to make a move there as well. So there you have it. That's my post mini camp, way too early 53-man roster prediction. I'll definitely have another one of these out, once we get started with training camp, get into the preseason before the Packers actually make those final decisions. So I appreciate you tuning in as always. Again, sorry for the long delay between videos, but we are back. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. You can find all my work at Dairyland Express and Cheesehead TV. So until next time, friends, have a safe, have a fun weekend, and go Pack Go.